In this video, we are going to take a look at Qtile, which is a tiling window manager written and also configured with Python. A couple of people in the comments have asked me about the window manager I was using and also how I configure my window manager. So that's what we are going to do in this video. Take a look at Qtile's config file. We're going to start with the default config file and then see how we can basically add our own configurations to it. It's actually pretty easy. We just need to use the predefined or pre-made objects that the developers have made for us. So for example, everything in Qtile is basically an object. So widgets, the bar, the groups, your layouts, everything is an object or a Python object. And we just pass in some arguments to basically customize them. And if you're familiar with Python, then it should be pretty easy. And if you're not, it should be pretty easy to pick up. So I would suggest that if you're completely new, to look up the official documentation about Qtile if you haven't yet, because everything in the official documentation is pretty well documented, actually very well documented. Everything that you need to know about Qtile is available here. So I would suggest to start taking a look at the this right here underneath configuration, where you can read about where the default config file is located, some of the default key bindings, and also the configuration variables that I mentioned earlier. Like for example, everything in Qtile is basically an object. Besides these ones right here, these are also configuration variables, but they basically allow you to make some minor changes to how Qtile behaves. And you can take a look at them. Everything is described right here. Now in this video, I'm just gonna focus on key bindings and groups. And then in other videos, I'm gonna take a look at Qtile layouts, the bar, and also how you can add scratch pads and also use D menu inside of Qtile, because I think a lot of people like to use D menu. So we're gonna take a look at that as well. So this is my setup actually for Qtile. So for example, I'm currently using the max layout. I can use mod tab to switch to a different layout. So this is the columns layout. I can also switch to the monad tall layout, and the monad tall and the columns layout have some minor differences. So for example, columns, yeah, basically tiles the windows using the columns layout. So let me show you an example. This is how you can lay out the columns. I can also stack windows upon each other. For example, if I bring the windows that are on the right now, those two terminals, and I bring them to the middle, I can stack them upon each other by pressing Mod Shift Enter. And now I have those windows basically stacked up on each other. And to show you or make it more clear, this is the window man. This is the terminal with NNN, and this is the empty terminal. So here I could, for example, run something else, TTI clock, to see the difference. So yeah, there's a lot of layouts actually available inside of Qtile, and each different layout you can configure by their own. So that's pretty great. But yeah, let's take a look at the default config file and see how we can get things configured. So what I'm going to do is switch to the default config file. So I'm going to close these terminals right here that I don't need. And let me go to Max and then change to the Qtile directory. And I have different branches set up right now for my Qtile config. So let's see, I have the master and test config. And the test config that I'm currently using, let's take a look. I only have a colors.py and config.py, as you can see. And I think I already copied the default config file. Yeah, so that this is the default config file that we are going to start hacking on. So what I need to do is reload everything. So you can take a look at how Qtile will look like by default, and then after we have configured the key bindings and also the groups, you can see how it will be different. So I'm going to reload it, And yeah, now it's reloaded. So we are using the default config file right now, except for the yeah. So now we're actually using. Okay, and Bitwarden is showing up. This is because I am using Scratchpads, and now this is showing from the hidden workspace basically. So I'm gonna close this, go away, and yeah. So now we can start taking a look at the default config file. So here we have some comments that basically explains the license. You can read it. I'm going to delete it for now. So like that. And then here you have your first two config variables, the mod key. So by default it is mod 4, which is the Windows key. You can also change it to mod 1 if you want to. That would be the alt key. And this is where it calls the guest terminal function. And basically what Qtile is trying to do is take a look if any of the terminals that are inside of this list, it tests against this list. And then if you are using one of these terminals, then Qtile will be able to open up the terminal when you press mod enter. And else you probably have to use mod R that I showed you earlier. This will show this little prompt inside of the bar, and then you can run any program that you want that you have installed on your system. Okay, so let's take a look at our key bindings. Oh no, let's actually take a look at all of the config file. So we have a list of key objects, as you can see right here. And as I said, everything in Qtile is configured by objects or with objects. And this is a key object to define your key bindings. Here we have our group object to create or configure our groups. And here we have our layouts, and this is also an object. So we have the columns object and the max object, and then all of these as well. So we have like, what is this? I think around 12 layouts available to us. Some widget defaults, and then here we have a screen that basically represents your monitor. And here we have the bar object. This is where you can configure everything inside your bar, and your bar consists of widget objects. And yeah, we will take a look at those in other videos. And there's also another, and these are the additional configuration variables that change how Qtile behaves. But there's also this right here, which is a floating object that also comes from the layout module. And this is where you can configure your floating layouts. So let me go back to the top again, and then take a look at our keys list right here. So defining your own key bindings is pretty easy. You can just take a look at how the default ones are created. So let's make one where we, for example, launch Firefox or any browser that you want. So launch browser. And as you can see, we just make a new key object instance and then pass in some arguments. So if you want to know exactly what arguments are expected, you can take a look at the documentation. But if we jump to the object definition, then we can read the docstring. And here it says defines a key binding, and then also lists out the arguments that it expects and what they actually are. So modifiers, that's the first argument of the constructor that takes these arguments right here. So any of these mod keys. So you can, it's a list actually. So you can, for example, only do your mod key or mod shift, mod control, or any of the others. And this is your key specification. So any key that goes together with your modifier, and then the command that you want to run after you press your key binding. And then also additionally, you can add a description. So let's do that. The first argument is the modifier, which should be inside of a list. So we're just going to use the Windows key. So we're only going to pass in one item. Then a string that should be your key, your key specification. So I like to use the mod W for launching a web browser. You can use whatever you want, of course. And then we need to pass the lazy object, with the function or command that we want to run. So let's come back to that later. And then a description, launch browser. So this is actually optional, so you don't have to do it. But to launch an application, you can call the spawn function. So spawn like this, and then Firefox is the application that I want. And then I'm just going to save it. You can, of course, add as many as you want. So, for example, I could add Discord. I also have a binding for Discord, like this, and then change this to Discord, and yeah, and then add as many as you want. So this is pretty easy. If you want to know how I knew to use the how did I know to use the spawn command, because there's already one inside the default list, and that is this one right here, and that's to call open up a terminal. So let me actually put that back, or put that together with these right here, so it's grouped a little bit better. And if you want to know about all the other ones where you can find read about those, just follow this link right here. Yeah, actually, if you just go to configuration variables and then go to lazy objects, this is where you can find what kind of functions you can run. This is the one that we just used. These are some group functions, window functions. And actually, let me add these two as well. So to toggle floating mode and full screen mode, because I also use those pretty often. Let me add them. Yeah, I'm just gonna add them right here for now. So key, and then mod F is what I like to use for full screen, and then lazy dot what is it, window toggle full screen, and then a description that says toggle full screen mode, like that. Then we can have another one for floating toggling floating mode, or not floating mode, to toggle your float your windows. So I'm gonna use space and then two modifier keys. The other one, mod shift space, is what I like to use. And then this needs to be changed to toggle floating, if I remember correctly. Yeah, toggle floating. Yeah, so this should work. We're going to take a look at this later when we reload and see if those work. But yeah, that is how easy it is to add your own key binding. So just take a look at these commands right here, and then just play around with them. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so next we want to take a look at our group objects, and we have to scroll down a little bit to this list right here. Now, the default one is pretty simple. They just use this list comprehension here to loop through this string right here, and then they create 9 groups to, and then assign each character to the group instance. Now I'm gonna do it differently, because I want to add some different options to each group, so you also know how to do that. So just I'm gonna comment that one out, and then redefine the groups list right here, and like this, and then create a new group object. And let's take a look at what kind of things we can add here. So the first one would be the name of your group. I'm just gonna use numbers, because the name of your group is also what allows you to switch to that group, as you can see in this for loop right here. So in this for loop right here, they basically extend to the list right here on top of our key objects, and then they here, so mod, and then I is your group name, and then the name of your group. So in this case, that would be one. That will allow you to switch to that group. And here, this right here, the second key binding that they add is to move a window to that group. And if you use this one, after you move a window, that will also immediately switch the focus to that window. So let me actually demonstrate that one. So I'm currently in the second group, as you can see here at the bottom, as it is indicated right there. And this is the first group where I have my browser. If I press Mod Shift 2, that will send my terminal to the first group and immediately also focus on that window. So like this. I actually don't like that behavior. Uh, so what you can do is use this one right here. So I'm gonna uncomment that and then actually just delete this one because I never use that. So I'm gonna use that, leave it like this. Now back to our group objects. Let's take a look at what kind of things we can add right here. So let me jump to the definition of our group object. And here you can see the arguments that we can give to our group class. So the first thing is the name, as I already shown you. We can also assign certain applications or windows to a group. We can also take a look at the default layout that we can assign to a group, uh, and also the label. So, for example, if you saw earlier in my setup of Qtile, I use the Japanese numbers from 1 to 9. Not because I'm Japanese, but really because I just like the aesthetics of it. But you can pass in any label that you like. Yeah, so the label will basically be the display name of the group, and if you don't set it, then it will just use the name right here. Yeah, and you can take a look at all the other arguments as well if those are interesting to you. So yeah, let me show you how I set things up. So the label, and then I'm gonna add the label later, and then the matches list, and then we have to give it a match object, uh, and also a default layout. So for the first group, I usually use that for internet stuff like browsing, mail, and that those kind of stuff. So I like to have that be the using the max layout by default. So yeah, that's what you can do right there. So this is just a string, and you can choose any of the layouts right here that you see listed right here, and then just write it as a string right here, all small case or lowercase, I mean. Now let's go back to our match object right here. So we can give it a pass in the class name of a specific window. So if you want to know how to find out the class name, you can use xprop, and then you have this cursor, and now I can click on Firefox, for example, and now right here I can find out what the actual class string is. In this case, I suppose you can use Navigator as well, but I like to use Firefox. So yeah, like this. And then right here we have our label. Certain people like to use these kinds of labels, www, to indicate that's for browsing, dev for development, and doc for documents, and so on. Um, Other people like to use icons, so you can use nerd fonts for that. I'm going to use Japanese fonts. Now, I actually don't have any input method for Japanese font. So what I'm gonna do is just copy paste it from a website right here. So yeah, I can just copy this and then paste it right here. Yeah, you can use this too if you like the aesthetics of it, because as I mentioned, this is just pure aesthetics for me. And then yeah, I'm just gonna copy this, and then I'm gonna come back to you in a minute. Okay, so I'm done copy pasting the Japanese numbers right here. Yeah. Now there's actually one thing that I forgot, and that is that the first key binding that we defined is in conflict with uh, the kill window key binding, which is defined right here. So we use mod W to open up a browser, but as you can see here, it is also used to kill a window. So I'm going to use it with the binding that I usually use, which is Mod Shift C. So yeah, that's something that I forgot about. And then yeah, we can leave that as B. And then take a look at yeah, I think that should be it for key bindings and groups. Perhaps to end the video, before we test our config and reload everything, is make some minor changes to the bar, just some small ones, like moving the bar to the top. You can do that by changing the variable right there. And then perhaps rearrange some stuff here, like the current layout. I like to display that after the group box. The chart widget is something that I don't use at the moment, so let's delete that. This is also something we can delete. And then the sys I like to have that after our clock. And then we can also add a background color. So that goes after the list of widgets. And I like to use the currently using the North Fox color scheme. So that is why I enter that. And the way I use colors throughout Qtile, because this is using Python, you can use dictionaries or create dictionaries to basically have this key value pair of the key color name and then the hexadecimal value of the color. So this is my North Fox dictionary with colors for North Fox. And then we actually also need to import it right here. So from colors, import North Fox like that. And then I can go back to my bar right here, and I need to add this size name for the height of our bar like this. And yeah, I think that's enough for right now. That should do more than enough for our current setup. So I'm gonna close our setup and then run Xephyr to test our config. So this is basically to run a nested X server inside of your current session. I actually have to kill my previous one that I was running with to test. So let me try that again. Yeah, and then pass in. Let me move this a little bit. Yeah, so then you have to basically say that basic util that you want to run a qtile inside of this display right here, and then just press enter and see if we have any errors or not. No module named ti. So okay, we have an error. So let's see where that error actually is. I'm gonna send this to another window. I'm gonna open up config.py. No module named ty. Where do I have ty? Oh, this is why. From typing. I actually don't need if we need actually need this. Well, I'm gonna just leave it there. Close it, and I actually have no idea how to rerun this command. So let me just kill it again then, like this, and then okay. So now you see we have no issues, no errors are reported. So that should be working. Let me close this window and then stop this, kill that X Xavier, Xephyr, whatever the name is, and reload everything. So control mod R, that will reload your file, and as you can see, everything is working correctly, except that the bar still looks pretty horrible. But we're gonna take a look at that in another video. So let's actually test out some of our key bindings. So we didn't do a lot. So let's test one of the key bindings. If I press Mod F, that will go to full screen. If I go back, then it will toggle it off again. If I press Control Shift space, that will now turn it into floating mode. So now my window is floating like this. And if I do Mod Shift Space again, that will toggle the floating window back to uh, tiling. So that seems to work. Yeah, and then we had another one to, for example, open up a browser, which is Mod W, and that should, yeah. So Firefox is opening up. So everything seems to work. Now you know how to define your key bindings, create your groups, also how to test Qtile using this nested X server. And yeah, hopefully this was helpful. Tell me what your favorite tiling window manager is, and also if this is content that you like to see, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like.